Technology has always shaped the world of art.
Mm.
The moment photography emerged, it just redefined what painting had to be. New tools have always pushed boundaries.
Right.
But today, with things like generative AI, the tension feels different. What's changed is the speed at which these tools are showing up, and honestly, the intense level of suspicion around them.
Exactly. And when we talk about AI and art, the public conversation, it so often defaults to,
Yeah.
spectacle or fear
Or just novelty.
or novelty,
Right.
right? It treats the technology like it's just this fleeting trend, and it demands justification from anyone who even dares to use it. But the source materials we have today, the professional CV and artistic profile of Roos van der Jagt, who also goes by DBO Rosis,
Yeah.
they let us move past all that hype.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to use this one artist's trajectory as a case study.
Yeah.
We're looking at emerging technology not as some kind of special event, but as a core condition of the present for a working artist today.
And Roos van der Jagt's a perfect example. She's a multidisciplinary artist in Rotterdam with a really long career, visual art, photography, film, going all the way back to 1996. So by diving into how she integrated these new technologies, we can really unpack how the entire conversation around artistic agency is changing.
And how intention is demonstrated, and ultimately where authorship truly lies.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's unpack this practice. We're looking at someone with a very classical foundation. Her CV lists solo painting shows in 1996.
Right.
And early films at the International Film Festival Rotterdam in 2003, photography commissions as late as 2015. So this is a long history in very traditional, recognizable ways of making images.
And that establishes credibility, It gives context. Her profile says her work has always connected classic visual disciplines with new image languages. So this isn't an artist abandoning one thing for another.
It's an adaptation.
It's an active adaptation. She sees the evolution of her tools as just continuous with the history of art itself.
So when she starts using these contemporary digital tools, it's not some weird aberration. It's just the next necessary step for her artistic practice. But I have to ask, doesn't that intense educational commitment she made suggest her older skills were becoming, strategically inadequate?
That is a really critical point, and that's why her formal training here is so important. It shows strategy, not surrender.
Okay.
She didn't just casually start, fiddling with some software. She completed a MicroMaster in integrated digital media from NYU between 2020 and 2021.
And then master modules in innovation management and business innovation right through 2024.
Yeah.
That is a significant formal investment of time. It tells you that for a professional artist, technology isn't a fun little option anymore. It's a required skill set.
It's for creative and operational relevance, exactly.
Yeah.
It intentionally repositioned her whole practice.
Mm-hmm.
Her profile makes it very clear that using these technologies is a strategic decision to maintain artistic autonomy.
And expressive power.
And expressive power, right, within these new visual languages.
Yeah.
It's her way of saying, look, if the means of production are shifting, I have to master that new language so I can keep controlling my own vision.
And we can see the immediate real-world application of that. I mean, the leap from a traditional photography commission in 2015 to landing an AI photography project for a big environmental agency in 2024.
That shows you how fast that skill set became not just marketable, but necessary.
It really does.
And think about the technical differences there. In 2015, your constraints were what? Film stock, lighting, lenses, the darkroom.
Right.
Now, for an AI project, your constraints are prompt engineering, understanding data bias, curating outputs. The tools change, but that artistic labor of managing the constraints, that stays the same.
The job of the artist hasn't vanished. It's just changed mediums. And looking ahead, her planned presentations like the Future Image Lab at Art Rotterdam in 2026, they confirm that this tech is now at the absolute center of her high-level exhibition strategy.
It's context.
It's context, not novelty.
And that completely shifts the conversation away from should we use AI to how do we define intent when we use it, which of course leads us right to authorship.
Right. And the source material points out that these tools are so often treated as shortcuts rather than instruments.
Mm-hmm.
Which leads to that immediate, I think, toxic assumption that automation diminishes intention. You hear it everywhere. If the machine did the heavy lifting, where's the artist's soul?
That's the narrative that artists in this space are just constantly fighting, and that defensive posture is exhausting. The only way to resist it is to shift the focus completely to artistic decision-making. The core principle she cites is just so powerful. Tools do not make the work, decisions do.
That is where the analysis needs to be. It defines authorship not by the visible struggle, the physical
Under
labor,
the sweat?
but by the intent, the selection, and the responsibility for the outcome. But how does that work in practice? If a machine can generate an image in a second, doesn't that just inherently change the labor equation?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's use a scenario. Imagine Ruth uses a generative tool. She puts in a prompt, and it gives her back, say, 100 potential images.
Okay.
And now, if she then spends an hour sifting through those 100 images, she picks two. And then she spends 3 weeks refining those final twos in post-production based on her classical training. Where was the labor? Was it the machine generating the first 100 images, or was it her labor of selection, curation, and intentional refinement?
The insight is that the selection is the labor. It's the application of trained judgment.
Exactly. The artist brings the concept, the training, the selection criteria, the final context. The tools are just assistants. Incredibly powerful assistants, yes, but they are ultimately subordinate to the artist's authority.
And we see that agency in her project titles, right? Like the short film Miss Algorithmique or Timeless, which was shown at a digital Hollywood keynote. Those titles suggest very directed conceptual stories, not just, random outputs she accepted as is.
And beyond the final product, she's actively making the process an intentional part of the work itself with her documentary series, The Artist.
Right.
That series is documenting the real systemic issues of making art today, including, and this is a direct quote, navigating questions of authorship in the context of emerging technologies such as AI.
That is such a brilliant move. It's a proactive claim for agency. By reflecting on the structural, the financial, the psychological conditions that shape the work, she's asserting that the authorial act includes managing the whole context around the creation.
Not just the creation itself, it makes that invisible labor visible.
It does, and that transparency is a direct counter to the suspicion we started with, which brings us to this frustrating reality. The uneven standards of scrutiny. The source materials state that artists using new tech are often asked to justify their presence more rigorously, to explain, defend, and contextualize their choices in ways that more traditional practices rarely require. This is the core structural tension. Why is that justification even needed?
This is the double standard in action. We celebrate innovation in theory, but we scrutinize it so heavily in practice. I mean, think about it. If a photographer uses a super expensive modern digital camera with all this complex software,
No one bats an eye.
no one asks them to justify why they didn't, carve the image on a stone tablet.
Yeah.
But the second you introduce AI, you were instantly expected to prove that the process was visible and painful enough to be legitimate.
It's like the artist's labor is doubted by default until it's proven. It forces them into this constantly defensive posture.
Precisely. And in that kind of environment, authorship becomes this really contested space. Who gets credited immediately? Who's instantly distrusted? And crucially, who holds the power, the institutions, the funding bodies, to decide where authorship even begins and ends?
And it's often not the artist.
It's often not the artist.
So what does that systemic suspicion mean for an artist's day-to-day life? We're talking about things like policy navigation and institutional language. For the listener who just wants to see the final image, why should they care about grant writing?
Because that scrutiny is a huge time drain. Policy navigation means you have to define authorship on a grant application using the institution's legal terms, which might prioritize, say, physical materials.
Instead of the artist's own conceptual terms, which prioritize selection and curation.
Exactly. And if an artist has to spend half their time writing these defensive applications just to satisfy a skeptical system, that's 50% less time they have to actually create art.
So the systemic scrutiny doesn't just question the work's quality. It actively diminishes the resources available to even make the work. The problem isn't the tool.
The problem is the structure that demands this constant, tiring justification. And that's what her project, The Artist, is all about. It places her personal experience within these broader systems, making it clear that this suspicion is a systemic issue that artists have to fight to retain their autonomy.
So if we zoom out, we've traced this artist from classical disciplines to a really strategic integration of digital tools, and she's resisting that shortcut narrative by just relentlessly focusing on intent.
And this deep dive really reinforces that technology is just another instrument in the toolbox. It's continuing a long historical line of tool evolution. The conversation really shouldn't be about purity or, nostalgia for old methods.
It should be about responsibility and choice.
Responsibility and choice. The critical difference is the intent behind how you select and apply the tool. You use the instrument that best lets you realize your vision, whether that's a film camera from 2003 or a sophisticated AI from 2024.
Okay, so if authorship is defined by that intentional selection and responsibility, and not by the visible labor of, say, mixing paint, then the real authorial act is the decision to claim the work, even with all the resistance. But let me leave you with a final thought on this, building on that idea of transparency we talked about with the artist
I
series.
do.
If authorship is now about responsibility, what does it mean when an artist chooses to document the labor and the rejection, the process itself, as a critical part of the final work? Especially when the tool, AI, is already provoking so much resistance. Does that radical transparency about the structural, financial, and psychological conditions of creation add a layer of value to the work that the final image alone could never achieve? And does that documentation ultimately become the ultimate undeniable claim of agency in a world so determined to distrust the result?